All right, you're going to need to see my eyes for this. Now, vision is our ability to detect the refracted photons. Photons are a stimuli that exist in the world. Obviously, the light that's coming from our sun is being sent out because of a big reaction, an atomic reaction at the furnace of our sun, and it refracts out light. Now, as that light comes out, it bounces off objects. Think of photons as either a wave or a particle. In this class, we're going to talk a lot more about wavelengths of photons. And again, just like the compression of air molecules, it has a peak and a trough. It has a frequency and an amplitude. And the frequency that we'll talk about here, how many up and down cycles there are in a particular wave, is only within a small segment. The visible spectrum of light is only within 400 to 700 nanometers. So everything you're ever seeing, everything you've ever seen in your life, in the entire world that you've perceived with vision, is basically light that's coming off of something, bouncing off of something, in between 400 and 700 nanometers, an incredibly small wavelength of light. Now, there are much larger wavelengths of light, and there are much smaller ones. For example, things that are much smaller would be things like gamma rays, and things that are much larger would be things like, say, AM, FM radio waves, your Wi-Fi waves. Those are all much larger iterations, and I think when people don't realize is that light is bouncing all around us and we don't see it. I'll tell you a small story about UV light. So UV light is ultraviolet. It's beyond the violet, indigo part of our visible spectrum of light. But it's very useful for certain things. In fact, for babies, when babies are born, oftentimes they have this thing called jaundice. And jaundice is basically that they have a buildup of a particular protein in their skin called bilirubin. And that bilirubin usually gets broken down by their liver. But when you're born, babies' livers aren't always quite hitting all cylinders yet. So babies come out, they'll look a little yellow. You'll see the sclera, that's the sclera is called the white of your eye. It will be yellow. And so what happens is doctors realized very early from a long time ago that jaundice babies, if you expose them to sunlight, that they would get healed. Now, they didn't know why, but then they figured it out. It's the ultraviolet light actually goes into the skin and breaks out that protein that would have normally been broken down by the liver enzymes. So doctors and corporations, GE invents this big ultraviolet light. They put babies in a little basket underneath, and they shine the UV light down on them. And parents started to complain. They said these babies, they're not getting treated. Now, if you know anything about first-time parents, you're a nervous wreck. You don't know what to do. I don't care how smart you are, how many books you've read. You don't know what you're doing. These first-time parents who have babies there and don't know about bilirubin or what's going on or the treatment or its effectiveness, don't know that they can't see ultraviolet light. They would complain to the doctor. So eventually GE put in a little indigo violet light, like a black light. It's not actually doing anything. That's not the part that actually helps the baby. The ultraviolet light, the ultraviolet spectrum of the light is what helps the baby. But still they put in that little purple light so that the babies will get help. Now, if you know anything about this, today, if you walked into some neonatal unit, you're going to see that indigo sort of black light. And that part that you see isn't the part that's actually doing anything. The part that's doing something, that's helping those babies with jaundice, is actually, well, you can't see it. You could detect its work by, take a bunch of jaundice babies, half of them go under a light that has UV and half of them don't. The ones that don't go under the UV light aren't going to get over their jaundice as quickly. So it's not going to be as a smooth road for them. That's light outside of the visible spectrum of light. Again, light that we see, everything that you have ever encountered in your life has been between 400 and 700 nanometers. All right, I'm back up close so you can take a look at my eye. Hi, there's a giant eye there. Now, what parts of my eye do you see? Obviously, you see that I have eyelids, eyelashes, eyebrows. All of these are developed in order to keep my eye pretty healthy. Now, what you'll also see is that I have a white of my eye. The white of my eye is actually a part called the sclera. You may have heard people say, don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes, something from the Revolutionary War, when the Americans were fighting off the imperialist, fascist British. The sclera actually is the very tough portion. If you ever take a lab class like biopsychology, you'll get to cut open a cow's eye and you'll see how tough that can be. The sclera, however, is not opaque, and so you can't get any light through it. It doesn't let light through. But if you look again, you'll see that there's this circular portion here called the iris. All right, the iris is that circular portion, and it has a bunch of little flecks in it. Those flecks are specifically striated muscles that actually open up. The iris, the colored portion of your eye, has a small opening at the center. Many people call it the pupil. I don't really like that because, well, I hate it when people say, you know, if you look at this bench, you might say, oh, you see the rail, you see the slats here. Nobody ever says, hey, do you see the blank space right there? Because that's nothing. There's nothing there. I can stick my hand through it. There's nothing here. Same thing's true with my eye. There's nothing in that little black part. You guys might think that there's something there, but there's really nothing there. All you're seeing is that there's no light that's going in and then reflecting back out. So the pupil, that's what most people call that black part, isn't actually a thing. That's why I'm kind of on a crusade to stop having people call it anything. I really want you to focus on the iris, which is this striated muscular structure that opens in low light. It's going to open so that it can take in more sun, and in very bright light it's going to constrict really far down. I don't have, let me see if I can shine my light in my, see about this. I'm using my camera on my phone, and I think it can shine a light in there, and we'll see what happens. Can you see my pupil restrict? So what's happening is that's closing down, saying there's so much light, there's too much light, and it closes it down. All right. The iris is the part of your eye that opens and closes the amount of light that can get in. There are drugs and there are brain damage that can cause that mechanism of closing down and opening up not to work. So sometimes when you see doctors will look into the eyes of people, police officers will look into the eyes of them, and they'll wonder why are police or doctors doing that. They're trying to ascertain if this person's taking drugs that might be compromising their brain's ability to communicate. Also, doctors want to know if there's bleeding on the brain that's putting pressure down on the nerve that goes between the two eyes. You have a junction called your chiasmatic nucleus, and that optic chiasm, where they come together, if there's pressure on it, you could restrict one eye and the other eye won't restrict. It'll stay open. And so if you shine a light in, a doctor's not actually looking at that eye. They're probably looking at this eye to see if it's what's called reactive. And so that's sort of the mechanism for getting light into your eye. Now, we haven't even covered what's on the outside of your eye because you can't see it. Outside of your eye is translucent. You can see a little bit of a reflection off of it, and that reflection is reflecting off of something called the cornea. The cornea is a multi-layered structure, part of the organ of your eye, and that tissue specifically is crystalline in a way that allows for light to pass through. And that's a really neat thing because we have a transparent portion that allows light to go in, but also if you notice about the cornea, it's bent, it's kind of curved over. Your eye is not an orb. Most of us think of our eye as an orb. You know, if you ever take a class in drawing my eye is not round. There is a round portion in it. The iris is circular, but the eye structure of a human doesn't look round, nor is the eye actually a round or a sphere only. It's kind of got a flattened and protuberance on the front part. Now, if you want to try that, close your eyelid, gently place your finger over your eye, and look up, down, left, and right, and around. And if you do that, what you'll notice is that there's a bump underneath the skin, and you'll feel it going up and down. What that is the bump in front of your cornea. That's the first place where light gets bent as it goes into your eye. When it goes past the cornea that's translucent, that light can pass through, then it hits the iris. And it only goes into the center part of the iris, right? It doesn't flood the flood the eye orb, it is focused in that circular portion in the center of the iris that's either dilated to get in as much light as possible or constricted in order to restrict the amount of light in. I think that's all I want to tell you about the outside of the eye. Oh, your cornea. It's also the only part of your eye that has sensory neurons for like touch. If you've ever scratched your cornea, you know it. It's extremely annoying pain. It's not intense pain, but it's extremely annoying pain. It's nonstop. Cool news about the cornea is that if you do scratch your cornea, most likely it can heal. It's a fast healing organ. It, like your mouth, heals very quickly. Don't fret if you scratch your cornea. Go see an ophthalmologist, and they'll probably put some dye on your eye, and then they'll look at it with a special tube, because they have to dye the part to see if there is a scratch, because if they just looked, it's translucent. The light doesn't bounce off of it to come back to the eye doctor. So yeah, if you scratch your cornea, you'll know it. It hurts a lot. I did that one time by not wearing safety glasses when I was using a line trimmer. So please always wear your safety glasses and your hearing protection. I didn't talk to you about hearing loss as a result of earbud use, but we have found that there is significant hearing loss associated with earbud use compared to, say, over-the-ear earphones, traditional earphones. So I'm not advertising for them, but Beats are better than AirPods, huh? Back to your eye. Once light gets through that center portion of your iris, then it's going through a big open cavity inside the orb of your eye. And it's filled up with two fluids, the aqueous humerus and the aqueous vitreous. And those two fluids, one of them is in between the next part of your eye called the lens and the iris, and it's very loose. It's very much like water. But right behind it is a more viscous or a thicker substance, and it has almost a jelly-like or jello-like consistency to it. And what its job is to do is to keep things tight and pressured in there. Your eye is pressured, and so you want to make sure that stays that way. Some people, when they have trauma to their eye, it can even that fluid can shift and it can detach their retina, which is, we'll see the back layer of their eye. Let's see, anything else that I wanted to tell you about? Oh yes, the lens. How silly of me. So the lens is a really cool thing because it's this sort of layered tissue. It has layer after layer after layer after layer. If you imagine an onion where you would chop through an onion and you'd see those concentric circles that go down, down, down to the smaller and smaller ones. The same thing is true for the lens, but these layers are transparent. Also, this is a flexible substance, and so there are some muscles called your ciliary muscles that attach to the top and to the bottom. And then when I want to focus far away, okay, I can relax those muscles and that'll stretch the eye down. If I want to see really close, if I want to see what's right here on my hand, then I'll stretch I'll flatten out that lens, and it will change the focus of the light that's coming through my cornea, through the center portion of my iris, and then that lens can bend it perfectly so that it hits the back of my eye where the retina is, so that I have a really good visual acuity. Visual acuity means that you see something very crisply. Let's see if I can, let me try and change. All right now you don't have very good visual acuity on my face. But if you focus the light properly, then you'll get a better visual acuity. If you go too far, then not so much. And all I'm doing is I'm changing the focus of my camera right now. So as light comes in, the lens is doing the same exact thing that the lens on my camera right here is doing, is that it's trying to focus it perfectly so you have very crisp, very detailed vision. Later in life, your lens is going to get tired. Those muscles won't work as well. Right around 40. And nobody ever tells you this either. And then as soon as I start talking to my parents and my parents' friends and like my older friends, I'm like, man, my eyes got really bad recently. And they go, oh, are you 40? And I'm like, yeah. They go, yeah, that happens to everybody. Well, why didn't you tell me? So I'm here telling you, when you turn 40, your eyes are no longer going to be able to focus in, focus out, focus in, focus out. They can't do that. They're going to be it'll be struggle. It'll be slow to get focused. And then it'll be slow to go out of focus. And then it'll slow back into focus. Now, one way to see how fast you are and good at you are is put your hand up. So if you put your hand up, you'll be able to change your eyes so that you can focus, like say on your hand, right? And spread your fingers out and then look right at me here. Now, if you could also shift so that you can see me, right? But you're looking in the same place and I look really detailed, but my hand kind of looks blurry, right? Or you could shift back, or you could shift forward, or you could shift back. Now you can do that with your eye in real time. So you don't actually need me to be shifting the camera's lens to be able to do that. You can do that with your own eye. So I want you to put your hand up and then focus so that your hand looks really accurate and visually, you have visual acuity on your hand. Don't move it, and then focus your eye back that direction so that it comes in focus, the far focus, and then focus up on your hand, and then focus far, and then focus up on your hand, and then focus far. What you might feel is this sort of pressure that you may have never sensed this before, but there's a pressure in your eye, and what that is those ciliary muscles that are extending and contracting and extending and contracting and allowing you to be able to focus the light that's bouncing off the world into your retina, which is the back layers of your eye, and where those sensory neurons are to detect the light stimuli, the photons. All right, where were we? I think we were talking about the retina, or we were about to. I'd mentioned that there's a layer, the back of your orb of your eye. In fact, it goes almost all the way around. This is what enables us to have peripheral vision out in the side, not just our focal point of vision, a foveal vision. But the retina is a multicellular structure. There's horizontal cells, bipolar cells, amacrine cells, ganglion cells, and then these rods and cones, which are our photoreceptors. Strangely, not how I would have designed it or what I would expect to happen via natural selection, but the eye's really weird. Light goes through a transparent cornea into the center opening of the iris, through the opaqueness of the aqueous vitreous and the vitreous humor, and back to transparent cells, the horizontal, bipolar, amacrine, ganglion, and then finally it hits the rods and cones that are all the way at the back. It doesn't seem to be really, I don't know, efficient. Light hits those things, and then these two types of photoreceptors, rods and cones. Rods because they look cylindrical, cones because they look conical. Literally, they look like that under a microscope. On the sides of your eyes, or the peripheral parts of your retina, you have almost exclusively rods. On the center point of focus, so when you're looking right at me right now, the image that is projected onto whatever device you're watching, that's hitting the center point of your fovea. And the fovea is the part of your eye that has almost exclusively cones. Cones and rods do semi-different things. Again, both of them are reacting to light. We have three types of cones: short, medium, and long. They are more responsive to short, medium, and long wavelength photons. So we talked about that before, where the short ones are the 400s, the long ones are the 700s. And they tend to focus differently. Rods respond most to like the 450 to 550 range, sort of a greenish range, even though rods don't see color. You don't see color in your periphery, only see that in the central point of focus. So while you perceive yourself to have color vision out on the sides, you don't. So if I were like looking over there, I would think that I saw that this plant was green. Really what that is my rods that are receiving some signals from this little green thing over here. I can see it's green in the monitor, but I can't see it's green with my eye. I can see that it's moving, right? So rods are really good at detecting movement, but they're not sufficient, and they don't have enough variability for us to see any form of color. We can see gradations, we can see grayscale, but we can't see color. So while I know that a lime tree's leaves are green, my brain knows that too, and it presents that to me as though I see it green. But if, say, you had somehow magically you were able to change the color of these leaves to something else, my rods wouldn't see it, but my cones would. If my cones were looking specifically at this with my center point of focus, then I could see if there was a change in color. But I wouldn't be able to see that with just my rods. People that have macular degeneration, or this is the center port of their retina begins to develop some holes in it, they also report problems with color vision because that's where all the cones are that help us to see color vision. Two theories on how we see color. Both are wrong, so it might sound weird to you that I'm explaining to you two theories, but we don't actually know how you see color. There's no unifying theory of this. I'm going to say that a lot in this class. Get used to it. We don't know. We do know that we can see color. We also know that our vision is, I think our vision is the best of any animal, but it's not as, say, great at seeing visual spectrum of light as a lobster, but a lobster can't do very good at movement, and a lobster can't do long distance, whereas we can see really long distance, we can see really up close, and we have color vision. Some animals like hawks can see really far away, don't have color vision. Some animals have very acute sense of motion detectors like owls, but they can't see color. And they're not good at seeing up close, right? So I think humans have the best eyes, the best visual sensation, but it's again me talking as a human. This is a bias that I have because I can't know what it's like to be a bat. You can echolocate. In fact, kids who have visual deficits have even learned to ride bikes in their neighborhood by doing clicks. I don't know how they produce the clicks, but they create an echo, a sound wave, and what would happen is if they're close to something and it comes back to their ear really quickly, even though they don't have a visual sensation, it gives them a sense of how close they might be to a certain object. Now, I'm not advocating for blind kids to go out and ride some bikes in the street. What I am saying is humans are extremely adaptive, and they can overcome all sorts of difficulties. So, rods and cones, rods for dim light. Oh yeah, if we're looking up at the stars, you don't want to look directly at where you think a star is. Turns out that your fovea, the part that has cones, is not very good at detecting dim light. It needs a lot of light. But your rods, especially the ones right next to the fovea, right around it, are extremely good at detecting dim light. So look just a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a little bit above, or a little bit below, wherever you think that particular star is that's very faint, and you'll be surprised more often than not you'll be able to discern that only when you look away from where it is that you're trying to look to. Some metaphor for life in there, I don't know what it is. But that's your eyes, that's rods and cones. I think that's all I have to tell you about them. Okay, now I want to talk to you about your sixth sense. Now, you might not know it, but you can see dead people. I'm just kidding, you only have 5 senses. Although some folks may say that our ability to sort of integrate the senses is a third sense, which is something your parietal lobe does, is the integration of your senses. You also might say that your body sense of itself in space is another sense. So please don't be worried about the numbers, but you certainly can't see dead people. I hope if you can, we have to get to the end of the class where we talk about mental illness, and then we'll help you out there.